absolutely interested in seeing what like.
The YouTube is now live. Well, when you speak to him, just ask him. And I'm bringing up the presentations. And so we'll just hand it over to Deputy Mayor Benayak for opening comment.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in, and thank you to Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee, which we have formed about almost a year and a half ago. We did 3 public sessions. This is the third one. We did East Branch, Winkle, and now it's the West Branch. This West Branch is specific to downtown part of Glen Avenue, and it's written there West, South Mountain, and Main Street. Downtown Main Street is the important one, along with the other ones too. They're very important. Glen Avenue is the first one that takes a hit, and then the West and South Mountain. So this team was formed about a year and a half ago, formed by the resident and the township engineer, business administrator, and also Tom Doty, our DPW supervisor or chief. So the motive for this team, I'm sure Alex will go into further details. They actually go in and try to look for the issues and the potential solution with the inputs from the residents and the business owners. There may not be the 100% solution. We are just trying to mitigate as much as possible. As a township, whatever we could do locally, we try to knock that off. We have done some things already. We have started the home elevation program. South Mountain has started a few homes have applied for it. We'll see the application is in process where state takes care of majority of the portion of their home elevation expenses. Part of it the homeowner pays. Uh, Similarly, there were few piping projects. We removed the small pipe, made converted into bigger pipes. That project was spoken about decades ago, was never got done. We already did. I think 2 of them were finished. There's a third one where the residents are on the third one are actually working with us now to make that happen. Earlier, residents were not too keen on, or for whatever reason, was not too keen on getting their project done. This year we made that, with the help of residents, we made that possible. Township took the entire cost burden on themselves. So with now more collaboration with residents, we are getting somewhere. So you have to understand, if there are other towns involved in bigger projects, that's where it takes time to get those projects done. Uh, but wherever the township can do it, we are happy to take the initiative there. So passing it on to Alex McDonald, our business administrator.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Sanjeev. So the agenda for today is on the screen: committee overview, history of flooding in Millburn, why and where we flood, and specific items to the west branch of the Raw, which, as the deputy mayor had stated, sort of runs from West Orange all the way down through South Mountain Reservation, over under Glen Avenue, through the downtown, and then through Western South Mountain, where it converges with the East Route 78. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So just real quick, I'm going to read the statement of purpose for the Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee. The intent of the Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee is to identify potential solutions with the help of professionals, mobilize community involvement in flood control matters and funding concerns, address funding issues with the governing body of the township, provide pertinent information to residents, and serve in an advisory capacity to the Township Committee on Flood Control Matters. On the right-hand side of this slide are all those members of the flood mitigation team: Mayor Miggins, Deputy Mayor Vinayak, Martha Callahan, who's on the dais as well, who is the Township Engineer, Tom Doty, Superintendent of Public Works, myself, Vic Bennis, Joe Esposito, Miriam Kirstoy, Jim McKenna, Mike Roberts, Niraj Nakpal, and Sarah Sherman. And today, from the Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee, we have Vic, Miriam, Sarah. And so I think that, this group has, as the deputy mayor said, has been a very dedicated group for the last year and a half, meeting on a very regular basis, having these public information sessions, and having public meetings via Zoom last year to continue to bring awareness and understanding of the township's flooding issues. I think one of the most important aspects of this group is the education and the acknowledgement that the township of Millburn does flood, that we need to educate our residents and our businesses and everybody that's involved with the township to understand that, and then work toward those things that we can do to help mitigate flooding. Not an easy task by any means. This is something that has, and we'll get about the history of flooding in Millburn and the various efforts that have been taking place over the last, 50, 60, 70 years. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah Sherman, who's going to go through the history of flooding in Millburn.
Thank you. So this slide highlights our history of flooding. We know historical records indicate there was a flood back in 1899 before the town was developed, but it affected what would be considered downtown now. I'm going to do the major storms that you may know about, but also some others where it takes 3 or 4 inches of rain and there's a flood somewhere, and it's important for us to know about that. In 1938, 6 inches of rainfall in July and a September hurricane flooded both the east and west branches of the Rahway in South Mountain, Glenwood, and downtown. And it was reported that there was flooding in areas that had never flooded before, like the Canoe Brook Country Club and Sagamore Road. The town was supposedly cut off on 3 sides by the amount of water. A $10,000 expenditure for storm drains in Glenwood and a sewer study were proposed, and the town commissioned engineering reports. There was also a coalition of towns that formed to address flooding. So you can see that there were efforts even then. At that time, it was hoped that the WPA would pay for a project that would mitigate flooding. In 1944, a storm caused East Branch flooding and wind damage, but the focus was on the war. So if you look at the historical records, not so much interest in flood mitigation at the time. In the 1960s, there were several flood events. A drainage project was proposed for the eastern end of South Mountain neighborhood in 1962, but this was rejected by residents because the township would have assessed the affected properties. In 1968, 3 inches of rain flooded downtown Milburn. And in 1969, there was a tornado-like storm that caused damage in the Wyoming section. In 1985, there was Hurricane Gloria, 3 inches of rain in 24 hours, and the intersection of Milburn Avenue and Vauxhall was flooded. In 1987, 4 inches of rain in an unnamed storm, and that required an evacuation by rowboat from a business on Milburn Avenue. On July 24th, 25th, 1997, 9 inches of rain fell over 28 hours, and that led to significant flood damage and losses totaling about $3 million. Some of you who were here might remember that 120 Milburn Avenue, which is the Medical Arts building on the other side of the Milburn-Vauxhall intersection, there was up to 4 feet of water in that building, and they lost a $1 million MRI unit. So there's significant damage. Following this, the construction of a dike between Oval Road and Horan Circle was proposed. Hurricane Floyd visited in September 1999 with 8.5 inches of rain, affected 500 residential properties and 90 commercial properties. And the flood wall on Ridgewood Road and the raising and widening of the Vauxhall Bridge were 2 projects that followed that particular storm. August 2011, Hurricane Irene produced 8.92 inches of rain, and for many of us, this was just a revisit of Irene, of Floyd, significant damage. Superstorm Sandy was a wind event, and we were inconvenienced for a very long time, but that did not cause flooding. And that brings us to the more recent past and Tropical Storm Ida in 2021, which I'm sure you all remember. Rainfall was measured at 7.94 inches, so that's a little less than the 100-year flood, which is 8.66 inches. So many of us here have experienced the devastating effects of this storm on both residential and commercial property. And as Mr. McDonald said, this committee was created as a result with the intent of making flooding mitigation a priority and moving forward on that. Okay, the why and where. And I wish I could see it, so I'm glad I took notes. Okay. So we know that water flows to lower elevations, and we know that there are 2 valleys that run through the town. And so we have the East Branch, which is indicated by number 2, I believe, West Branch by 1, and then the Van Winkle Brook, which comes through the Glenwood section. The West Branch affects Glen Avenue, downtown, the Washington section, and South Mountain. The east impacts Milburn from Cypress to Vauxhall and Ridgewood Road through to the Gilbert Place area in the back of that particular street. The Van Winkle affects Woodland, Meadowbrook, Glenwood Avenue, and Milburn Avenue. And the Washington section is affected by both Van Winkle and West Branch. There are also other parts of town, perhaps not mentioned, that in heavy rainfall, maybe not in a named storm, but they do experience backyard ponding and some street flooding as well. Okay, so this is on the left, the West Branch watershed. And then on the right, I believe these are the FEMA flood zones, which Ms. Callahan can confirm for me. This is the West Branch flood zones, and shows us from the top of the map, I guess, coming through town, through downtown, and then curving around back behind, through Washington, back behind South Mountain, and then on into the Springfield area. Is there anything I am omitting here from either of you?
In case anyone is not really familiar with flood maps, and if you're in the downtown, you probably are, but I just want to mention the flood mapping that's on the right. You see that striped section, that's called the floodway. So that's on either side of the river. It's much wider than the actual river itself. If we went out and looked at the river right now, it's probably, I don't know, 15 feet across. That's a much wider strip, and that actually, think of that as becoming the river. When we have a flooding event, that wide, that's the river. It actually has a current to it. Everything else, the floodplain, just beyond that is what's shaded yellow. That's where the river tops out over its banks and just spreads horizontally. So that's the 100-year floodplain.
And when was that mapping done?
That, I believe, was 2007. So that was,
Is there more preliminary mapping done that's waiting to be finalized by FEMA?
not currently, not for our area, but we're gonna look into that, because the other thing too that Sarah mentioned, with Ida, we didn't have quite as much in numbers, as much as Floyd or as much as Irene. But it was the intensity of that storm, because that almost 8 inches of rain fell in, I believe it was like a 5-hour window. So it didn't spread out over 24 hours. It was so intense. And it's very difficult to prepare for something like that. We knew the storm was coming, but it's hard to determine what the intensity is going to be. So,
Martha, just taking a pause here. We will have Q&A after. Let's go through the entire flow, and we will go back to the slides wherever you have questions or you want to ask questions. We'll love to go back there. But just so everyone has the whole overall view of what this East Branch River is, please do not take it offense. Just saying, let's go into the Q&A in detail after the fact if you're okay with it.
Great.
Thank you.
Miriam?
Solution types. What we see around town is the old approach, get the water away and fast. We see that through channelization, storm sewers, floodways, basically get the water moving fast through rivers. The modern approach is to slow down the flow. We're looking into green space along rivers, detention and retention ponds, rain gardens, pervious pavement, and dry wells. Key factors are the volume of rainfall, intensity, and duration. We have limited space, development, impervious surfaces, upstream in the watershed. We also have contributing factors like roofs, streets, driveways, sidewalks, patios, and a lot of drought in this region. So the solutions we are seeking as a team and nationally is prevention, mitigate impacts, faster recovery, and floodplain management, which we'll cover in the later slides. For the constraints, before the constraints, what the two pictures that we're looking at, so that's Taylor Pond. We're looking at Bauer Center. That was during Ida a few years ago. The bottom photo is Taylor Park and Main Street. You could see Bauer Center in the back. And that was during Irene. Melbourne has been flooding for hundreds of years, and we have regulations that protect us and also limit us. The height of the flood walls is one example. Scale of solution needed. Water takes a lot of space, we know. We have overdeveloped areas and very little space to store or slow down the water and flow. Expense to benefit is another factor, and support for the solutions are impacted by residents, local government, state, and federal government.
I want to briefly mention some of the improvements that have been made on the Rahway River. Milburn was settled in the 1700s, 1800s. The heyday of all the mills in town, which were developed all up and down the Rahway. You can see on old maps. It's amazing to pull out a historic archival map of the Rahway as it goes through the middle of the town, and you see one hat factory after another. There were hat factories all the way down. I mean, not just one, two, like 15 or 20 of them. I don't know how they competed, but and so they used the river. The river was that's why people here. They used the river. They didn't have electricity at that point. So, and of course, with that the factories developing, that's where all the housing came in, and people lived there. They lived near the river, and now they're getting flooded. So certain improvements were attempted along the way. They tried to, first of all, in some cases, as you go down to improvements, the first item, installation of culverts under Springfield. Not really sure when that occurred. It occurred the first time someone tried to build a road over a river, they put a culvert in. And over the years, the road widens, they put a bigger culvert in. And so I'm not really sure when, Morris Avenue was constructed. 38, and during the 30s, the WPA, and Sarah mentioned the WPA earlier, they did do armoring of the stream, hardening of the walls of the Rahway. You see a lot of the rubble walls, and that went all the way up, I believe, to up into where the paper mill is. Well, you see those old rubble walls, those were built in the 30s. So that was part of Roosevelt's New Deal. So we apparently, Milburn, we qualified for these types of programs. Then further down, below Taylor Park and below the bend in the river takes a bend to the east, and that's where the Fandango Mill was constructed, and which is now currently Lakeside Village. And we know that there's a Fandango Dam that was constructed then. And the river at that time, if you look at old mapping, it just kind of meandered around through there, but they decided, let's straighten this out, and they put embankments in to do that. And then somewhere along the line after that, if the embankments were eroding because the river didn't want to be confined in that space, it tried to meander back, and they hardened the embankments with reinforced concrete walls. So that's, the Mother Nature doesn't like to be confined, and they don't like those walls, but that's what was done for years and years. And now we're sort of faced with, right now, where the walls are failing. Should we take them out? Should we try a different embankment treatment that's more favorable to the environment and maybe might be more friendly to the river too as well? But for right now, we're stuck with these walls, and we have to figure out what to do with them. So as we continue to the 60s, redirection of confluence of east and west branches. That was a state project. Some of you may remember when they built Route 78. Meg, did you live in town then?
I grew up in South Orange.
Oh, okay. So
Two
yeah,
towns away.
right. Yeah. So, but a lot of the state took over then, and a lot of changes were made where the two rivers, east and west branch, come together, which is right under 78. So there's a lot of big culverts there. And what happens currently is as the river comes down and you have less slope in your river, it flattens out. The water slows down, and that's where it deposits a lot of sediment that it's been briskly carrying along on a slope. When it flattens out, it drops all that sediment. So underneath Route 78, we almost had islands there with trees growing out of them. They've been there for so long. And a few years ago, I think it was 2018, 2019, the state did come in and remove a lot of that debris underneath 78. So that helps. It gives you more volume for the water to continue on its way. Let's see, it says 2010 up there, but I believe that the Taylor Park floodgates were removed and replaced with the spillway in 2014. So that was done. Alex was here then, I was here. So that was a good project because it keeps our pond. We always have a pond now and we have a fountain there. So it's nice. It's a recreational benefit. We do have we have the capability with a bypass pipe that is installed with a valve that if a rain event is approaching and predicted, we can go in there and open that valve up and drain that pond. It gives us a little detention area, so it helps to mitigate some of the flow further downstream. So
I think it should also be noted that pond will be dredged in the fall. A lot of sediment and material was deposited there post Ida. We put in a public assistance project with FEMA to have that pond dredged to create additional volume in the event that we drain that pond prior to a storm.
Did we not just drain the pond at the last storm that we had?
Yeah, we always drain the pond.
How quickly does that fill up?
Pretty quickly, especially now with the amount of sediment that's in there. And that's the idea of when you dredge it, while it'll give you some volume initially and maybe a little bit of time initially, but it's a sort of a quick improvement, not necessarily something that is
it's not a solution.
Correct.
It's an aid, but it's not a permanent solution. It doesn't have a lot of volume, that pond, but we're in the process. We have drawings ready. We could hire a contractor to go out there today and do it, and we've gotten our DEP approvals to dredge that pond, but they won't permit us to start until I think it's mid-September because of various environmental reasons. So we can do our dredging project between September and December. So that is on the books. It's all been approved. Let me see, where are we now with the prevention? Raise the levees. We do have walls in the South Mountain area. They were constructed after Hurricane Floyd along Ridgewood Road. People wonder why the walls weren't built taller. We weren't permitted to build them any taller. The DEP, everything we do now, and just going back to the wall, constructing walls in the first place, there was no DEP back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s when they were doing this. And so they just willy-nilly did whatever they want with the river and nobody cared. That's overseeing all this. You can't touch a river. You can't go into the river with a piece of machinery to dredge it out on your own without DEP approval. You can't touch the rivers without getting some kind of a permit. So they would not let us construct those walls any higher than they are right now because just barely. Too bad, you downstream town, you take all of our water, we're gonna just block it all and not take our own share. DEP wouldn't permit it, so we put the walls in as high as, and it does give us time, which in any given storm, having those extra 20 minutes maybe before that river crests over and floods on Ridgewood Road. Maybe we're not going to get enough rain to make it come over that river. So those walls do provide protection. And it's not just for the most major storms.
The same applies to the walls that are throughout the downtown as well.
Exactly. Right. So we did the one big project that we're actually looking into very strongly right now is the Orange Bypass. We do have engineering firm that is looking at the design of that, and we're pursuing approvals. We have to get approvals from the county, from Orange Reservoir, City of Orange.
Yeah,
because they own it. So
I can speak to this a little bit more because this is really a one of the solutions that would have a very positive impact to the downtown area. The Orange Reservoir sits at the top of South Mountain Reservation, right by Turtleback Zoo. And there's a series of 3 ponds: Orange Reservoir, Campbell's Mill Pond, and Diamond Mill Pond, that sit within the reservation. Any amount of detention of water that we can get in any of those areas will have a positive impact in the downtown. So we are actively working with the City of Orange Township to gain access to the reservoir to do a bathymetric survey, which would give us the contours, depth, and information that we need to further solidify the data and the information regarding the benefit of a bypass, and then work toward a design of a bypass. This has been spoken about for a long time, and initially it was a part of an Army Corps project, or the hopes of it being an Army Corps project. And that was back in, I want to say 2019, that the Army Corps came back to us and said, nope, we're not doing it. We will not do anything that is forecast-based release of water. And so we had to start looking at this as more of a local or Rahway River Basin, Mayor's Rahway River Coalition project, to see if something could get done there. There's just far too much benefit from that to just stop at the word no from the Army Corps. And so this Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee, the Township Committee, everyone is continuing to work toward that project. It's still a long road, but it is one of the better solutions that we have out there to help with the impacts that do occur in the downtown.
Does everyone understand what the Orange Bypass is? I mean, we throw that term around.
Yeah,
We know what it
so
is.
it's essentially the release of water from the Orange Reservoir prior to a storm to create detention within that reservoir. So let's just say it's 10 feet. We would lower that 2 days prior to a storm to down 10 feet. That would create that volume of water detention within the Orange Reservoir. A similar concept could be applied to the other 2 ponds as well, but right now the focus is on Orange Reservoir. It is the largest body of water, and it is sort of the most well-structured body of water up in South Mountain Reservation.
And the difference between the past and now is earlier it was considered as FEMA project and federal government will pay for it. Then it became like a Rahway coalition with so many other towns around, and everybody will take a portion of it. Since Melbourne gets the most benefit, I think it is now being talked about whoever is getting the benefit, they get that kind of portion. So Melbourne may have to take larger portion to pay for the project. So that way, the other towns that are getting a little less benefit, they don't have to pay that much. So Melbourne is trying to say, okay, Melbourne is being helped more. We are ready to pay more for the project, and we are more interested and keen on finishing the project. So City of Orange has started talking to us. Essex County was a little worried about how it will look when the pond go down. We are working with both of them, especially with the town of Orange right now, to get them up to speed on board with at least getting yes to this project. And then once they are completely on board, then we can go to this Essex County and have a conversation with them.
So going on to mitigation, and this is a tough one. I mean, we when you going to the second item, improve the flow in the river, anything flow in the river. Of course, we can remove obstacles in the river after a big event, take out the big tree trunks. Tom Doty's crews do a lot of that stuff. But again, anything that we do to improve the flow in the river just sends the river quicker down to the next town. So it's not like we want to keep the obstacles in there, but we do have to be careful about how and when we do that. Improve flood mitigation infrastructure. Well, one thing that we just completed, and Sanjeev had mentioned this, that we had drainage projects that have been on the books for a long time, since the early 2000s. And that we had these conceptual plans, and we recently completed a drainage project on Ridgewood Road, $700,000 project, which will aid in draining out the rear yard, so an accelerated recovery. So these people that do get flooded in the Ridgewood Road area, as soon as the rain stops and the river level goes down, their rear yards will be drained, be sitting with water in their backyard for 3 days. It's something that we've already put it to the test with several storms that have come through, and it works very well.
So the other thing here too is that, you know, obviously when we were looking at the downtown area, like the ability to get water out of the downtown is far more difficult. Taylor Park Pond acts as a natural detention area for the floodway. But one thing that we had recently done was also put up a barricade or barrier behind the alleyway of Milburn Standard, Umi Sushi, things like that, to prevent unnecessary debris. As you may recall, in Ida, a car, a dumpster, things like that went into the river that create blockage. And when you create blockage, then certainly you get a different type of flow to the river. It exceeds its bank in places you didn't expect. And so that guardrail was put in as a prevention method to keep things from flowing into the river unnecessarily. Some of this other stuff doesn't necessarily sort of pertain to the downtown, which is obviously our focus today, but cleaning debris at Taylor Park, cleaning debris of overgrowth in the riverbed, this is something that is done prior to every storm. This is something that, Tom Doty and Department of Public Works, they walk the river. They see if there's any potential hazard trees, things like that would cause an issue during a storm. In the last event that we had just recently, where everybody was kind of on edge and waiting for the shoe to drop when it came to, I think it was about 3 days or 2.5 days of rain. We were fortunate in the fact that there wasn't a lot of wind associated with that event. Had there been wind associated with that event, it could have been a lot different story, where we're getting a lot more debris into the river. And as you know, and we've explained, the part that affects the downtown comes through the South Mountain Reservation. As you can imagine, there are a ton of trees. It's not a managed forest, so there will be dead wood, there will be dead trees, there will be things that do fall into the river and may find their way to the downtown. And so we just, part of our efforts is always that prevention of seeing where there are areas that we can prevent trees from becoming a problem, other debris from becoming a problem. And so that is what we that is a lot of the prevention approach that we take with the downtown. So this slide is just a further explanation of the Orange Reservoir, just so that you can understand what we mean by a bypass and how that would help in the prevention of flooding. Again, and I think it's always important to note that flood mitigation is just that. It's mitigation. It's not prevention. We are not going to prevent flooding from happening. Right. And which is why, I think we do get into some ways of, being able to protect yourself, your business, things like that. But being able to provide additional time to provide, a decrease in the amount of flow that is coming into the downtown. All of those things factor into how quickly or how much we would be flooded. And time is always a friend in this. And the more and more I've been involved in flooding, the more and more I understand that the ability to slow the rate at which, in the time of flooding is so important. During that storm that we had a few weeks ago that I was just saying about everybody waiting for the shoe to drop, we had about an 8 to 10 hour period where there was no rain. Had we not had that, it would have been a completely different situation. And so the ability to delay things certainly helps in, how often we will get flooded. So Orange Reservoir bypass plays into that. Any sort of effort that is made to just create additional time could always help us. But that being said, every storm is different. Every, flooding will happen. But really what this group is about and what we've been trying to do is how can we educate people to help themselves in terms of flooding? What projects can we take on from a local standpoint that can help mitigate flooding? And, what can we continue to do and look at to improve upon the situation that Millburn and all the communities, quite frankly, that are in the Rahway River Basin find themselves in. And so the Orange Reservoir Bypass is certainly one of those really, really good solutions. It's just, it's, you know, it's where time is actually working against us, because there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of different stakeholders in it that will take time to sift through. But we are continuing and actively always working on this one. I sort of already went into the expectations. I'm not sure, Sanjeev, whose slide is this? I'm just.
So last one, 2 are Martha's,
Yeah.
and then Q&A.
Yeah.
Alex.
All right.
Expectations
So
as
yeah.
well.
So the expectation I've already kind of gone through. We're not going to prevent flooding. There will always be a storm that is stronger. We can talk about climate change, development, different things like that will sort of continue to impact or exacerbate the flow and the water that goes into the river. But but our job here is to educate, help mitigate, and help people prevent and protect themselves in the event of a flood. One of the things that was just recently done too is we installed a pulsar river gauge at Glen Avenue. It has not been calibrated or up and running yet, but it has been installed. We had to go through some agreements with Essex County, as well as we're putting one on the east branch of the Rahway. That is an agreement with Union County. But these will help us sort of continue to monitor the river level, and then we'll be working toward an alert system that will help residents, businesses, and everybody become informed about what they should be looking for as well, and what they should be understanding. Especially for new businesses. There are people certainly that have been in town and probably understand the river just as good, just as well as anybody else. But there are people when they come into town and when they open up a new business, and just having that understanding, that knowledge of what could possibly be and how to help prevent or help mitigate the impacts of that, I think go a long way. And so we'll continue to work on setting up that alerting system. We have on our flood mitigation advisory page, as well as the flood page, we have previous presentations that we've done as well, including our annual hurricane preparedness meeting, which was done on May 9th, where you can go and you can look. There are massive amount of resources out there from ready.gov that will help you protect your business, come up with a plan, kind of goes through all the steps that you should understand when being impacted or having the potential of being impacted by flooding. So with that, we're just going to go into the Q&A. I appreciate everybody listening. Obviously just to keep focused on, flood mitigation along the West Branch. And we've got a pretty small group here today, so I'm not going to get too worried about time and everything.
My name is Richard Footer.
Do you mind just taking the mic so?
Yes, my name is Richard Footer. I just have a couple of questions based on my past observations. Would it not be beneficial, and have you looked into it? I think you have. Dredging Campbell's Mill Pond, and Diamond Mill Pond to add extra holding capacity before they top over and come overground, not through the floodway, but overground through, like, behind the alley of the Standard, creating such a confluence of water in a split second, coming from the floodway, coming down the back of the alleyway, and then jamming up the bridge. So that's the question about the holding pattern. And where was I going with that? In the reservation, I have not witnessed this myself, but I've been told when they thin out the forestry and they saw cut, a lot of that comes down the floodway. And over the years, and not throughout the last catastrophic event, I've been told that those cuttings, large cuttings, are stored close to the water edge. So I don't know that to be fact, but it is something to look at because along with debris being characterized as cars, dumpsters, there's also the trees. Also, would it make sense to install another pulsar sensor at the bridge? And if it's done graph-wise to see at a moment's notice, when you look back at it, that surge coming from behind the standard in that alleyway is actually creating such a wall that can't get through the bridge, that's when the flooding effect has increased. And there have been times when that has not happened, that we may have escaped the extent of what we've experienced in the past. Thank you.
These are all very good questions. We are focusing on the top Turtleback Zoo one,
Mhm.
but dredging and cleaning the next two, which is not in our town, is it?
Correct. No, I mean, it's in our town, but it's owned by Orange. Campbell's Mill is owned by the city of Orange Township, and I believe Campbell's Mill is owned by Essex County. Just a sort of a note on that is that dredging doesn't do anything unless you have the ability to bypass it and get the water out to create the storage. So you can dig it as deep as you want. It's going to be filled with water as deep as it is, right? So the ability to pull the water out prior to a storm, much like we're talking about at Orange Reservoir, your idea on Campbell and Diamond Mill is extremely valid if you have that ability to bypass it as well.
Now, second question was making sure the trees are not on the waterway. Should we make a tour there, or can something be done to?
Well, I think Tom may have some experience with that and also has some contacts with Essex County, because it would be Essex County that's managing the forest. And if there is fact to that, they're the ones putting it there. So, Tom, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we checked this section, literally walk the river from downtown up to Campbell's Pond, or whichever the first one is right there.
Diamond Mill.
Diamond Mill. But to my knowledge, Essex County doesn't do much forestry practices at all on the reservation. So just the natural process of what nature does with trees being along a riverbank, and as time goes by, the soil gives way and they literally fall down into the stream area. So that's something that the group could discuss with Essex County to look at that stream, like the map, the stream corridor, to see where the main water may flow depending on elevation. So that's something that the group could talk to Essex County about too.
So perhaps the sort of prevention prior to getting trees out of quote harm's way, where they could end up being impacted by river water.
And as what Martha said, because of all the rules of the DEP, I literally think that, based on my experience, we may not be able to even cut trees along the riverbank as a riparian flood area. So we would have to get the DEP's permission to even to clean up trees that fell. So that would be a whole nother hurdle that the group is looking into and asking questions. So, that's something that could be looked into further.
So I have a comment on that. I think instead of actually having this group, this exercise seems like a good exercise to do. We haven't spoken as a group, or maybe last couple of meetings I wasn't here, maybe that was discussed. But cleaning up the tree from there, maybe our engineering and DPW gets on with their engineering and their DPW, I guess Sanjeev there, you could talk to and get that cleaned up as an exercise with the Essex County.
Yeah, I don't know how much the county has dedicated to the maintenance of the areas, the riparian areas. It seems to me, if a tree dies and falls into the river, we certainly can pull it out. We do it in our portion of the river because we want to remove the blockages from the river, and we're permitted to do that.
Well,
And I'm-
we're allowed to do it by hand.
by hand,
So
so.
So that's the
you know, if
only
the tree's
thing.
this big, that's quite a challenge. So
Right.
it's not that simple.
Yeah, and I'm not even talking about cutting any trees. I'm just talking about if the trees has fallen already.
The ones that have died and
Right,
grown,
right,
right,
right.
yes.
So
that's-
maybe something that,
Yeah, I think we can at least have a conversation and get a sense of what they're doing and whether they're willing to do anything further or allow us to do anything. The other thing is that the city of Orange Township, around Campbell's Mill Pond, had recently done, probably within the last 2 or 3 years, a major sort of cleanup of the trees and debris and everything around there, and did a fantastic job. Because I remember we had called DPW to go out and start trying to pull stuff out from the dam. And I got a call from the Orange business administrator, said, "Oh, hold on, we're just about to go out there and do that." And the next day they were out there cleaning it up. So I think it's a valid question and something that we can at least ask of Essex County.
it's always good to get input where we may not have thought through. And we are thinking a lot of things, but there was always something very trivial but very important. So, and the third one was the water meter. Sorry, sir. Just finishing up with the previous question. I know he's not here, but still a valid question. Water meter. I'm just lack of intellect here.
I'm not.
Water meter at that place where next to the bridge. I think that'll help.
I don't know that it has any benefit except for again to understand, I guess. But if you're seeing a rush of water from that area, you're gonna pick that rush of water up, or that sort of on the pulsar that's on Glen Avenue. Putting an additional one would just be another data point. I mean, I don't know that it has a large degree of benefit. So, I mean, Mr. Footer can certainly explain it to us a little bit more afterward.
It would get inundated by the water too. I mean,
Yeah.
if we put it on that side, the uphill side of the bridge, it's a piece of electronics.
You
Yeah.
can't
You
mount
would
them on
lose
the
it.
upstream side. It's gotta be mounted on the downstream side, and if we mounted it on, actually on your building or something like that, that whole area just ends up being a whirlpool right in there.
Yeah.
It would get destroyed.
Just also to comment a little bit further, and then we'll get to the question about the Milburn Avenue Bridge. As many people may recall, that was redone probably about 10, 15 years ago. And it used to have 3 arches. Now it has 2. Sorry, 4 arches. Now it has 2. Would I say that design was an improvement? I don't know, but that's debatable.
What frame shop. It seems the tree trunk is part of the problem for blocking the bridge. So why not simple solution? This could be put a strainer upstream somewhere. Strainer to strain out the tree branches blocking. It could be an easy solution if it is feasible. Paper mill up there.
What that would do, if we put a giant, strong trash rack up there, and then that builds up with debris, then it tops over, and we've created a flooding problem even further upstream than what we have right now. It's something maybe hydraulically we could look into that, and there could be something that could be constructed. The shape of it maybe could be in such a way that if it did top over, it wouldn't be a huge devastating effect. It would be spread out. We could look into something like that. Again, it would require permissions from the county, a lot of, because it's not our land.
You want to do that up in the reservation.
Right.
But
Right.
Martha, if we put that on, that's the only place we'll have to make sure it's cleaned up before the water happens.
It's exactly what DPW does now with all of our existing trash racks, and they go out pre-storm and make sure that all those
So
trash racks are cleared.
I'm just
and-
thinking, say if the tree branch comes through with the water, after it's all cleaned up, it'll get stuck there.
Mhm.
It would have gotten stuck under the bridge or inside the bridge or
Right.
downstream wherever. But at least we know that is the source where it's going to get stuck. But you're right, if that happens early in the game and the water starts toppling over, it will flood that area without even getting to a point where it needs to get flooded, right?
Correct.
And we have some of those already existing on small tributary creeks that are throughout town, that were put in a long time ago by hand. Like as example, a small piece of iron bar across a stream channel, which catches some branches and stuff. So what happens in a flood though, you catch X amount of branches or trees and more come down and then they just float over the top of it. So it does prevent some flooding, but again, we maintain them and it's a temporary, it's a time. It slows down time and flooding.
I
So,
think it is the matter of the size of the stream,
right.
what size can go through. So you play with the size of the net, I think there's a key.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
You have a question, Steve? Comment?
Good morning, everyone. Steve Grillo. I'm the Executive Director of Explore Millburn Short Hills. We're the Special Improvement District for the town. There's about 200 to 250 businesses that are impacted by this type of flooding throughout the downtown and other areas. And we've been talking about flood prevention from the municipal side and the government side. But I just want to let everybody know that every year we publish a hurricane preparedness document for businesses specifically. It'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks for this year. And it talks all about how you can prepare your staff, prepare your financials, all of your equipment. So, thinking about things like, where are my computers placed? Are they on the ground? Should they be elevated? So there's a whole checklist that's in that document to prepare 48 to 72 hours prior. And it can really do a lot of work to prevent significant damage in your business. So just keep an eye out for that, and certainly tell your neighbors about it too when you do see it. The more information that we can get out, the better. But it is something that our organization does to be proactive for your businesses in tandem with what the group is doing. So that'll come out soon, and we'll get it all to you by email blast and on the township website.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question. Philacti Paris. I have a question. Philacti Paris at Live Breads. The alert system, is it live now? We can sign up for the businesses?
Yeah, so that particular one is not live, but there are other river gauges
Okay.
that if you go to our presentation on
Okay.
hurricane preparedness, it has all the river gauges, both east and west branch, that you can click on. You can subscribe to it.
Okay.
You can get alerts from that as well. This is just something that we put in to have more local control over the monitoring and the. But there are already river gauges along both branches.
And that data is, we'll be able to understand it when 3 days before we get a hurricane, or we're just looking at numbers because I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with it.
You'll be able to understand it in the sense that there is a sort of a mark on that gauge that says, this is the flood stage, right? And that is where you start to, where you'll get an alert that will say, hey, the river is now at flood stage, that type of thing. There's a river gauge in Springfield that I particularly monitor, that you can see. It's very easy to understand because it has this big white portion that shows that the river is all good. It says, oh, now you need to start thinking about and getting prepared. And then there's an orange portion that is where flooding is basically happening or starting to happen. And then the red, which is where you're getting into or Irene or something like that. It's very easy to understand, but I would just play around with it and see it. And you can always ask questions if you have questions.
Sure.
it is understandable, but you do have to look at it and just kind of, look through it. It's not like, it's a graph, so it'll show you the river level at particular points in time.
Okay, one more. You have for the orange plan, the assessment and summer of 2023, assuming that they are okay with the orange project. Yep. The bypass, you said summer 2023, the assessment is done, right?
No, assessment, yeah, so that's
Assessment.
bathymetric survey.
Exactly. So assuming that's approved to the town's favor, how long will it take for us to see the benefit?
So that is step one of many steps.
Okay,
So the assessment is a bathymetric survey to let us know what the depth is. That's to help refine the data. That's to help then apply for the permits from the DEP. Then, certainly getting permission to do construction at the Orange Reservoir to construct the bypass from both Orange and, so you see, like, there's many steps. This is sort of the first step. But again, this project has been talked about for many years. We are further along in this project than we have ever been. And that is just a huge positive for, I think, everybody that's involved. That we're actually having conversations with Orange. We have an access agreement to them for their approval so that we can get in and do the bathymetric survey. We're further along than we ever have been. But it's still a road for sure.
okay, and one last question, sorry. Hurricane season starts end of May.
Today.
Yes,
June 1st.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the local reservoir here, they allow you to drench it in mid-September, which is almost the end of hurricane season. How does that help? If we get the water activities usually now until, and then we have 2 weeks. Ida was what, in September 4th?
September 1st.
Yeah,
The answer is it doesn't. Quite frankly, our ability to, first of all, dredging it is an expensive endeavor, right? So we applied for a project through FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we are getting money from them to be able to do this. Then we have to follow the rules of the state, which is you can't get in there and do that until September after hatching of trout, all of that stuff. So there are environmental constraints as to why you can't get in there in the summer. So the simple answer is it doesn't.
okay, it's a
Doesn't help.
DP, okay,
Yeah.
I understand. Thank you.
I'd like to add something about the river gauges because I and other people on this committee are gauge watchers. And so I also look at the East Branch gauge as well. And if I can understand it, anyone can understand it. I set myself a certain level at which I get the alerts. And I had it set very low for a while. And then I decided, no, I was frightening myself far too often. So I think I'm at 5 feet now on the East Branch, and I get my alerts regularly. And you can, when you go on this site, you can read a history of, the peaks and valleys and when it goes up. And it's very informative. So I recommend, don't panic. And go by what the town says above all. If they know, they all watch the gauges. And so if the fire chief and Mr. McDonald all know what's going on, and if there's an alert that's going to come out, they will alert you based on what they're seeing. So.
Did we take care of all your questions or at that time, or is there any more?
More about, are we getting an updated flood FEMA map? I
Okay.
think every county's looking for that.
Yeah. So Martha, just on that, I think there's a bit of I guess assumption, and I'm not saying from you, but I've heard from others. There's assumption that the flood map, particularly the hazard area outside of the floodway, should change, right? That it should be smaller. But I just want to caution everybody that can cut both ways, right? That any revision of that flood map could expand that area, or it could put it in a different area, and it could include properties that weren't included before. So whatever changes do take place, which I don't anticipate happening anytime soon, because I think the FEMA was focused in particularly on the coastal areas and what flooding and the flood maps in the coastal areas. But just as a sort of an aside is that, certainly that can cut both ways on what properties would be included in that. Right now, the way that flood map looks, generally is what happens with the river. When flooding occurs in the downtown, it will spill onto Main Street. Main Street will become a bit of its own river, and the river will flow down that way. In the last storm in Ida, all of Milburn Avenue up to Town Hall essentially was inundated with some amount of flood water. We received water here in Town Hall in our basement, and so it is something that we will certainly keep the downtown through Steve through our own channels informed about in any revisions of those maps.
So what we had done as a flood advisory committee here, the focus on the flood mitigation has ramped up. Sometimes it may feel that it's not enough. It will always be there. There is always room for improvement. Process improvement is always the key. But projects that were talked about for decades was done this year. And projects that we are trying to talk to, that was talked for multiple decades. And now there are mayors from different towns, they're talking, sitting down. I think we are getting closer. It's just that we are not the only town and we are not in the decision-making power. So we have no control on that. We can just influence it by saying we'll take our fair share of spending in that project. So that will give them some advantage or lucrativeness in there. That, okay, you know what, we will get eased on the flooding ourselves by paying less, whereas Milburn is taking the brunt of it. Thing is, we are trying as hard as possible, but what we have realized and what we have seen is at an individual level, if you can raise your property, you should look in that, you should ask that. It is the easiest way of doing it. Then it is at the township level, and then it goes down to the county or the state or the federal level. So if there is any other way that you can see that we as a town can help you, please bring that forward, and we are here to hear that out. The motive and the intention here is very straightforward and clear, and the team here is very passionate in mitigating flood as much as possible. We all love our town, and we are all here trying to do good stuff, but sometimes it takes forever, and sometimes we are not able to do it as per what we are thinking because of some constraint. But if you keep pushing us, if you keep bringing that forward, there are chances that we will listen and we will get focused so much on that we'll push it. And it's just the township here. I suggest you also go in the county and the state meetings and meet our assemblyman and meet our county rep, just to kind of keep pushing that forward, because when it comes from the residents, they get their attention. When it's coming from our elected official, okay, yeah, we'll take care of it. Yeah, we'll take care of it. Sometimes it works both ways. So you as a resident should also try to reach out to our county parts and state. I think that'll be very, very helpful. And thank you again for the team. Very focused, the creation. They are the one who also take the lead along with everyone else here. It's a very dedicated team, and we are very, very thankful to all of them.
Any other comments from? Okay. Oh,
I just want to thank you all very much.
thank you, Richard. All right. Thank you, everybody. And again, if there are any additional information can be found on the flood page as well as the flood mitigation advisory page on the township's website.